So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am.
Suspend their
Habeas
right to.
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
Habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. This is an extraordinary exchange between the Director of Homeland Security and a U.S. Senator. I don't think I've ever seen a more incorrect answer in my life. I say that as someone who spent time in front of a classroom teaching. And this student who got schooled by Senator Hassan was a cabinet secretary. Habeas corpus is not, in fact, a, quote, constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country. It's actually kind of the opposite. But this is the bizarro world that Trump's functionaries now live in. Up is down is up, and habeas corpus is a right that the president has to throw people out of the country, not a right we have that protects us against our own government. This is what happens when you piece together a government with people who look good on TV but who have no idea what they're doing. It's America as a reality TV show. But it's not a joke. We are in dangerous territory with people like Kristi Noem in charge of Homeland Security. Now, one thing she does understand is how to put on a show. That's why she and Trump made such a spectacle of the first rendition flight to the Gulag in El Salvador. It's why she posed like she was on some kind of safari in front of inmates in that prison. But none of this is actually making America safer. In fact, it is undermining fundamental rights that define what we are as a country. I think there is a silver lining, though. Americans are waking up. It's what I refer to as the antibodies of democracy. When an infection reaches a certain threshold, when it crosses a certain line, the antibodies are activated and they start to fight back. We're seeing that all over. We're about to see it in a big way on June 6th in Washington, D.C. with the Veterans March I am helping to organize. I'll make sure to put a link below. In communities all across the nation, regular, everyday Americans are saying this isn't who we are. We don't just suspend constitutional rights to go after immigrants. I think the Trump administration will soon feel the wrath of an activated American public. I talked to Reed Galen, former Republican strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, about this. We didn't see eye to eye on everything. I tend to be more optimistic about the willingness of Americans to stand up to Trumpism, but it's an illuminating conversation. We posted part 1 a couple days ago. I hope you had a chance to catch that. Here's part 2. Thanks for watching. It feels like some of it is breaking through, though. Just a few months ago, you had respected Democratic strategists and politicians saying, look, this stuff is a distraction. Even Gavin Newsom, right, saying the immigration stuff is a distraction. We need to focus on kitchen table issues. But I'm hearing more and more that people, even the Joe Rogans of the world, are skeptical about the administration's policies towards due process and habeas corpus. And Kilmar Abrego Garcia, I mean, if you attach his case to that of like a 4-year-old child, U.S. citizen with cancer, thrown out of the country, it feels like, to break through. And the evidence of that, probably too anecdotal at this point, but it certainly is visceral, are the swarms of regular Americans surrounding ICE vans in neighborhoods that they are raiding to pull their neighbors out of their homes, to rip apart moms and their babies. And there just seems to be that American reaction to injustice that occasionally is provoked at key moments in our history. Am I being overly optimistic about the nature of that response and the goodness of Americans?
I think there's two questions there. I think you're being overly optimistic. And I say that only because I have become not cynical, but skeptical The goodness of Americans, I think the goodness of Americans is being tested. I think that, again, we have not called on the goodness of our nature, the better angels of our nature, for a long, long time. And I think that we're out of practice at it. Am I glad to see that there are people who are standing up for individuals who are being detained without due process? I am. I also think back to, maybe because I'm an old campaign guy, Ken, I sometimes see everything, through the lens of voters. I'm just not sure how many guys are on their couches this fall watching the Bills play the Browns and go, man, I'm really worried about due process. Habeas corpus, man, that's got me up at night. And that's not because they're bad people. That's because the nature. I mean, look, so many of these threads that if you weave them together, all make sense. Which is, how is it that we ask our citizens to participate in a system in which we now educate no one, right? We don't tell them what the Constitution is. We don't tell them why it is. We don't tell them why elections matter. We don't prove to them through political and policy action that elections do matter, right? And so this disengagement, which has also been perpetuated and accelerated by MAGA, Trump, and all this other stuff, we have not seen the last of it. We have not fallen as far as we will fall. And so, yes, I am happy to see these glimpses. The one thing I will say, too, is, we've also seen thousands of people take to the streets or, fill stadiums with, say, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm glad to see those things, but those need to be the starting point of a larger movement. Those need to be putting the kindling in the fireplace so that when that spark does happen, and I don't mean in violence, I mean in politics, that there is a general, I guess uprising is the right word. I'm not sure, or reaction, as you're talking about. But, it can't just be that we have 50,000 people take to the streets and then everybody goes home, right? Who are those people? What else are we asking them to do? Are there leaders amongst them? Do we know what they're doing? Is there something else that we want them to do that's not another march? It's in their communities. And that's what we're doing at jointheunion.us is, what will happen, Ken, is that if enough of these things, if enough of these sort of rallies happen, but there's no follow-up and there's no change, then eventually people will stop showing up because, like their fellow Americans who don't vote, they'll say, well, none of it matters anyway. And that's what I think we have to do is there is a lot of work to be done. There are a lot of people that want to do that work, but it's on us, frankly, the people who have said we want to be leaders in this struggle to do the work, right? We have to provide the vision. We have to provide the direction. That doesn't mean we're anything better than anybody else. It just means that, like, in this time, we've chosen to say, okay, we're not going to sit by and we're asking you to join us. And I think that's the hard part is filling a stadium is easy, right? Getting those 20,000 people when they filter out to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, that's the hard part.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Huge shout out to everyone who has supported this show via our Patreon page. If you want to weigh in with questions for upcoming guests or give us feedback on past guests or make sure you never miss an episode, click the link below. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks a month, just know that we put every dollar back into the show. We do have another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up. Thanks for the help. Last question, back to the court. Do you think they are still a bulwark? What can we expect from this Supreme Court, given that at least a handful of them seem to be captured?
I don't think they are. It's through some of the. It's largely through their own action. Either the corrupted acts of their individual justices, or the fact that they gave this man a literal get out of jail free card last summer. They didn't have to do that. Right? No one said you have to go about this. The conservative majority, the 6-3 majority, said this is what we're going to do. And now
you're talking about the immunity decision, even in the face of the argument that he could order the execution of a political opponent and not be found criminally liable if it was done in the performance of his duties as president. Right. I don't think the Supreme Court has ever gone that far.
No, it's quote unquote an official act, which is also the other part too, Ken, which is, you could make an assumption that said immunity also extends to anybody in his executive orbit. So you think about just 30 seconds, You think about going back to Richard Nixon and the plumbers, right? They had to move those guys out of the White House over to the campaign. If this were Richard Nixon today, they would keep them in the White House because they would probably share that immunity. And certainly, of course, we've seen that Trump is willing to pardon anybody and everybody. The court, I don't think, is a bulwark. And even when it's tried to stand up, the White House is ignoring it. John Roberts can write letters. He can say, judicial independence is important. But frankly, he made this bed and now we're all laying in it.
Yeah. What bothers me is how surprised he has acted at the outrage of the American people, at their disappointment in the judiciary. I mean, I used to think, well, it proves the case that they really do live in as much of a bubble as the legislature that they check and as the White House that they check. The judiciary isn't immune from that kind of groupthink.
Well, I would say it's even worse because there's only 9 of them. And they have jobs for life. In fact, every federal judge, I think, except the magistrates, right, have lifetime appointments. And so, yeah, they're not there. But the idea behind that one, well, let's be clear, it's very, it's very, vague in the Constitution. But the idea, the ideal that was supposed to come from that was that they would not be affected by political outcomes. That every decision has some political aspect to it, but that they would not be affected by who's in charge at in the executive branch or the legislative branch. But clearly that's not the case anymore. The judicial branch is captured. The legislative branch is captured. And they don't have, the courts don't have an enforcement mechanism, Ken, right? Like that's the Marshal Service. Well, who do they answer to? Pam Bondi, right? Like it's not like they're going out of their way to go, Stephen Miller's in contempt of court. Okay, great. But to your point, too, is I think with the judges, too, and having spoken to several federal judges at an event recently, they resided in, yes, a very cloistered world, but also in a world that even if the law was sometimes gray, there were a set of rules that made sense. And I think that you're seeing a lot of jurists now who, like so many other Americans, don't understand the world in which they're operating in, because if a judge hands down an order, they have an expectation that order will be followed, and now that's not the case.
Well, it leaves us with the ultimate check and balance, which is the American people. And I do still think that judges, even functionaries within the Trump administration, are responsive to the kind of mass protest that signals where the country actually is. So as the weather warms up, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. We've got some big events planned. Power to the people. Thanks, Reed, for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.